Council Prime Veltar stood before the massive viewing screen, his blue-scaled hands trembling as he watched another planet die. The world of Kepler-7 had been home to 12 million Zilani just 3 days ago. Now it was nothing but a dark, lifeless rock floating in space. The void swarm had come like a plague of locusts, except these locusts were the size of battleships and fed on energy itself. Every weapon the Zilani Confederation had thrown at them only made them stronger. Their laser cannons were absorbed and turned into fuel. Their plasma shields were drained within minutes. Their most powerful energy weapons just fed the monsters. "Council Prime," said Commander Nixara, her voice tight with fear. "The outer defense grid has fallen. We have maybe 6 hours before they reach the inner colonies." Veltar closed his eyes. In his 300 years of life, he had never seen his people face extinction. The Zilani were peaceful by nature. They had spent thousands of years building a civilization based on knowledge, art, and harmony with the universe. They had 7 allied species in their confederation, all of them equally peaceful. None of them were warriors. "Sir," called out tech specialist Dalwin from his station, "I'm picking up something strange from the old ruins on Archeon 3. Some kind of signal." "What kind of signal?" Veltar asked, though he barely cared. Nothing seemed to matter now. "It's coming from the predecessor ruins, sir. The ones we found last year. The beacon we couldn't activate is suddenly working." Veltar felt a spark of hope. The predecessors had been a mysterious race that disappeared millions of years ago. They had left ruins scattered across the galaxy, filled with technology that even the advanced Zilani couldn't fully understand. Most of their devices wouldn't work at all. "What is it doing?" Veltar asked. Dalwin's eyes went wide as he read his screens. "Sir, it's scanning the galaxy. Looking for something. And, sir, I think it's looking for warriors." The word hit the bridge like a cold wind. Warriors. The Zilani had no warriors. They had police, they had security forces, but they had never needed real warriors. War was something from the ancient past. "Show me," Veltar ordered. The main screen changed to show the predecessor beacon. It was a black crystal the size of a building, covered in symbols that glowed with silver light. The crystal was sending out waves of energy in all directions, searching for something across the vast emptiness of space. "I've managed to translate some of the symbols," Dalwin said. "It's looking for apex predators, the strongest hunters in the galaxy. Species that know how to fight and win." Veltar felt his hearts racing. The predecessors had left this beacon for a reason. Maybe they had faced something like the Void Swarm before. Maybe they had found a way to fight back. "Can you activate it fully?" he asked. Dalwin's fingers flew over his controls. "I think so, sir. But the message it will send, it's not just a call for help. It's offering our most advanced technology in exchange for military aid. Everything we have." "Do it," Veltar said without hesitation. "Sir," Commander Nixara stepped forward. "We don't know who might answer. What if they're worse than the swarm?" Veltar looked at the screen showing the dead world of Kepler-7. "Can they be worse than extinction?" Dalwin activated the beacon. The crystal on Archeon 3 blazed with light bright enough to see from orbit. Then it sent out a signal that moved faster than light itself, racing toward distant star systems. The message was simple. "To any species capable of warfare, our people face extinction. The Void Swarm consumes all energy. Our weapons feed them. We offer all our technology in exchange for salvation. Coordinates attached. Time is short. 40,000 light-years away, on a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. Dr. Elena Vasquez was working the night shift at Deep Space Monitoring Station Alpha. She was drinking her 5th cup of coffee and wondering why she had chosen to study alien signals instead of something normal like medicine or teaching. Then, every alarm in the station started screaming at once. "What the hell?" Elena jumped up, spilling coffee across her desk. The main computer screen was flashing red warnings. "Unknown signal detected. High priority emergency frequency. Origin Galactic Sector 7 Alpha." Elena had been listening to space for 12 years. She had heard all kinds of signals. Natural radio waves from stars, leftover radiation from the birth of the universe, and occasionally the boring chatter from human colonies. She had never heard anything like this. The signal was clearly artificial. It was complex, layered with mathematical proofs and star charts. And it was desperate. Elena's hands shook as she ran the signal through the translation computer. Slowly, word by word, the message became clear. When she finished reading it, she sat back in her chair and whispered, "Oh my God." She picked up the red phone that connected directly to Earth's military command, the phone that she had never used in 12 years of work. "This is Deep Space Monitoring Station Alpha," she said when someone answered. "I need to speak to General Morrison right now. We have a situation." "Dr. Vasquez, it's 3 in the morning," came the tired voice. "This better be important." "General, I just received a distress signal from 40,000 light years away. An alien species is facing extinction and they're asking for military help." There was a long pause. Then, "Are you sure about this, Doctor?" Elena looked at her screens, at the star charts showing a clear path to the alien system, at the desperate message asking for warriors. "Yes, sir." "And General?" "They sent detailed navigation data. They want us to come to them. Send me everything you have. I'm calling an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs." Within 6 hours, every military leader on Earth was staring at Elena's translation. The message was clear, the star charts were detailed, and the attached video files showing the void swarm consuming entire worlds were terrifying. General Morrison stood before the assembled commanders. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a decision to make. An alien civilization is asking for our help. They're offering advanced technology in exchange for military aid." "It could be a trap," said Admiral Chen. "It could be," Morrison agreed. "But look at those video files. If this void swarm is real, and if it spreads, how long before it reaches us?" The room fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing. If something could destroy an advanced alien civilization, what would it do to Earth? "The aliens sent us detailed star charts," Morrison continued. "They're showing us exactly how to reach them. That's not what you do if you're setting a trap." "How long would it take to get there?" asked Colonel Wright. "With our fastest ships, about 3 months," Admiral Chen replied. "But we'd need to send a lot of ships if we're going to make a difference." General Morrison looked around the room. "I'm recommending Operation Salvation to the President. We send everything we have. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier who's willing to go." "Everything?" Admiral Chen asked. "Everything," Morrison confirmed. "Because if we're going to help, we're going to do it right. These aliens asked for warriors. Let's show them what human warriors can do." 2 days later, the largest military fleet in human history began preparing for launch. 847 ships, from massive battleships to small fighters. Soldiers, Marines, and even civilian volunteers. They were going to travel farther from home than any human had ever gone before, and they were going to war against something that ate energy itself. Back in the Zalani system, Council Prime Veltar watched his sensors as another colony fell to the swarm. He wondered if the beacon had worked. He wondered if anyone had heard their call for help. He wondered if anyone was coming. Deep in space, the first human ships engaged their faster-than-light drives and began the long journey to answer a desperate call from strangers. They carried with them humanity's oldest and most powerful weapons, kinetic projectiles, nuclear warheads, and the unbreakable will to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Void Swarm had never faced anything like what was coming for them. Council Prime Veltar had expected maybe a dozen ships, perhaps a small scout fleet or a few military vessels from whatever species had answered their desperate call. He had not expected to see 847 human warships drop out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of his star system. The Zalani bridge crew stared at their sensors in complete silence. The numbers didn't make sense. No single species kept that many warships ready for battle during peacetime. It was impossible. It was insane. "Sir," whispered Commander Nixara, "they're requesting permission to speak with you directly." Veltar straightened his ceremonial robes and nodded. "Open the channel." The main screen flickered and showed a human female in a dark blue uniform. She had short gray hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When she spoke, her voice was calm and professional. "Council Prime Veltar, I'm Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Defense Force flagship Indomitable. We received your distress signal and came as quickly as we could." "Admiral Chen," Veltar replied, still struggling to process what he was seeing. "How many ships did you bring?" 847 combat vessels plus support craft. We also have ground forces, engineering teams, and medical units. About 2 million personnel total. 2 million. Veltar felt his legs go weak. The entire Zalani military had maybe 50,000 people, and most of them were technicians and support staff. Admiral, forgive me, but why would your people risk so much for strangers? You traveled 40,000 light-years to help us. We don't understand. Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, Veltar felt something like hope. Because you asked for help, Council Prime, and because helping others is what humans do. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Human ships spread throughout the system, taking defensive positions and scanning for threats. Their technology was strange to Zilani eyes, crude in some ways, elegant in others. Where Zilani ships were smooth curves of energy and light, human vessels were angular blocks of metal bristling with weapons. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human who had first received the distress signal, came aboard the Zilani command station to coordinate intelligence sharing. She was a small woman with kind eyes who spoke softly but asked very good questions. Show me everything you know about these void swarm creatures, she said to Veltar. They spent hours going through sensor data and battle recordings. Elena watched as Zilani energy weapons were absorbed by the swarm creatures, their shields drained, their ships left helpless. They feed on energy, Elena mused, making notes on her tablet. Any kind of energy. Plasma, lasers, particle beams, it all just makes them stronger. Yes, Veltar said sadly. Everything we built to defend ourselves just feeds them. We are a pacifist people, Dr. Vasquez. We never learned to fight without our technology. Elena looked up from her notes. What about kinetic weapons? Projectiles? Things that don't use energy? Veltar tilted his head in confusion. Kinetic weapons? You mean throwing rocks? Not rocks exactly, Elena said with a slight smile. More like throwing very fast pieces of metal. We call them bullets, shells, railgun slugs. They don't use energy that can be absorbed, they just hit things very hard. Your people still use such primitive weapons? Primitive? Elena laughed. Council Prime, humans have been throwing things at our enemies for 200,000 years. We've gotten very good at it. While Elena studied the swarm, the human military leaders were making their own plans. Captain Marcus Rodriguez of the Colonial Marines was reviewing the tactical data with his staff when Admiral Chen called a meeting of all senior commanders. The conference room aboard the Mao Indomitable was packed with human officers from every branch of service. Army generals sat next to Navy admirals. Air Force colonels compared notes with Marine captains. Even civilian freighter captains who had volunteered for the mission were included in the planning. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Chen began, we're dealing with an enemy that absorbs energy. Every weapon the Zilani use just makes these things stronger, but we have advantages they don't. She activated a holographic display showing a swarm creature. It looked like a massive jellyfish made of black crystal, with tentacles that sparked with absorbed energy. These things are perfectly adapted to fight energy-based civilizations, Chen continued. But they've never faced kinetic weapons, explosive ordnance, or nuclear devices. They've never fought an enemy that uses primitive projectile weapons. Colonel James Wright raised his hand. What about their tactics, Admiral? From what we can see, they fight like a swarm of insects. Overwhelming numbers, simple strategies. They expect their enemies to be logical and predictable. They don't know how to handle chaos. Captain Rodriguez grinned. Lucky for us, chaos is what we do best. The first test came when a small group of swarm scouts entered the system. The Zilani watched nervously as human destroyers moved to intercept them. Instead of the energy weapons the swarm expected, the human ships opened fire with railguns. Tungsten slugs moving at 10% the speed of light slammed into the swarm creatures. The aliens tried to absorb the energy, but there was no energy to absorb, just solid metal moving very, very fast. The results were spectacular. Swarm creatures that had been nearly invulnerable to Zilani weapons were torn apart by simple kinetic projectiles. They had no defense against weapons that worked by basic physics instead of advanced energy manipulation. My God, whispered Commander Nixara as she watched the battle. They're actually winning. But the real shock came when the humans opened fire with their missiles. The swarm creatures, expecting energy weapons, positioned themselves to absorb the explosions. Instead, they found themselves dealing with high explosive warheads filled with metal fragments. The lead swarm creature tried to absorb a nuclear missile. The nuclear explosion didn't feed it. It simply erased it from existence. Within an hour, the entire swarm scout force was destroyed. Not a single human ship was even damaged. Admiral Chen opened a channel to the Zilani command station. Council Prime, we've eliminated the scout force. But this was just a test. The main swarm army is still coming. Admiral, Veltar said, I don't understand. How are your weapons so effective? The swarm has destroyed every fleet we sent against them. Because they adapted to fight you, not us, Chen replied. They evolved to counter energy weapons and logical tactics. But humans learned to fight before we even discovered fire. We throw rocks, we set traps, we attack from unexpected directions. We've been apex predators for millions of years. On the human ships, soldiers were preparing for the battle to come. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was checking her squad's equipment when Private Johnson asked the question everyone was thinking. Sergeant, why are we here? These aren't even our people. Santos looked up from her rifle. Because they asked for help, Johnson. And because if we don't stop these things here, they might keep spreading, maybe all the way to Earth. But that would take thousands of years, Sergeant. Santos smiled grimly. Maybe. But I've got kids back home and they might have kids someday. I want them to grow up in a galaxy where asking for help means someone will come. Across the human fleet, similar conversations were taking place. These weren't soldiers fighting for conquest or glory. They were warriors who had traveled 40,000 light years because strangers had asked for help. The swarm didn't know it yet, but they were about to learn why humans had climbed to the top of Earth's food chain, and why. When humans decided to protect something, they brought everything they had to the fight. Long-range sensors detected the main swarm fleet moving toward the system. Millions of creatures, each one the size of a building, traveling through space like a plague of darkness. Admiral Chen looked at the sensor readings and smiled. All ships, this is command. Prepare for battle. Today we show the galaxy what human warriors look like. The largest space battle in galactic history was about to begin. The first major battle happened at Kepler Station, the last major stronghold of the Zilani Confederation. The massive space station hung in orbit around a gas giant, home to 3 million Zilani refugees who had nowhere else to run. Captain Marcus Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the marine assault ship Hammer as the void swarm emerged from faster-than-light travel. The sight was terrifying. Thousands of crystalline creatures the size of battleships, their dark surfaces crackling with absorbed energy from their previous victories. Jesus Christ, whispered Lieutenant Park beside him. How many are there? Doesn't matter, Rodriguez replied, checking his rifle one more time. There's only one thing you need to know about fighting swarms, Lieutenant. You kill them one at a time until they're all dead. The swarm moved toward Kepler Station in a formation that would have made sense against the Zilani, a tight cluster designed to overwhelm energy shields with concentrated firepower. They expected the defenders to form defensive lines and fight logically. Instead, they met human fighter pilots. Commander Jessica Phoenix Taylor led the first wing of fighters in an attack pattern that would have looked insane to any logical observer. Instead of flying straight at the enemy, her fighters came in from 12 different directions at once, weaving through space in seemingly random paths. The swarm creatures tried to target them, but human fighters moved like nothing they had ever seen. These weren't the predictable flight patterns of civilized species. These were the movements of predators who had learned to hunt in 3 dimensions. Phoenix, lead to all wings, Taylor called over the radio. Remember, they're big and they're scary, but they can't absorb a missile up the exhaust port. Pick your targets and make every shot count. The fighters swarmed through the void swarm formation like angry wasps, firing kinetic missiles and railgun rounds. The alien creatures, designed to absorb and redirect energy attacks, had no defense against simple high-explosive warheads. But the real surprise came when the human destroyers opened fire. Admiral Chen had positioned her heavy ships in a formation the Zilani had never seen before. Not a defensive line, but a 3-dimensional web that could concentrate firepower from multiple angles. When the destroyers opened fire with their railguns, tungsten slugs moving at incredible speeds tore through the swarm formation. The aliens tried to adapt, moving into tighter formations to protect each other. That just made them better targets for the humans' nuclear missiles. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, came the calm voice over the fleet communications. Fire at will. Show them what happens when they threaten peaceful people. The battle in space was brutal but one-sided. The swarm had never faced an enemy that fought with such controlled chaos. Every time they tried to predict human movements, the humans changed tactics. When they concentrated on the big ships, the fighters attacked from behind. When they focused on the fighters, the destroyers hit them with railgun barrages. but some of the swarm creatures made it through to land on Kepler Station itself. Sergeant Lisa Park led Alpha Squad through the station's corridors, hunting the creatures that had broken through the outer defenses. These were the digester organisms, smaller swarm creatures designed to consume a station's power systems from the inside. The creatures were the size of cars and moved like liquid metal. They absorbed energy from the station's lights and power conduits, growing stronger as they fed. Against Zilani energy weapons, they were nearly invincible. Against human weapons, they were target practice. Contact front, called Corporal Martinez as a digester, rounded the corner ahead of them. Park didn't hesitate. She raised her shotgun and fired 3 rounds of high-explosive shells into the creature's center mass. The digester tried to absorb the explosion's energy, but the metal fragments from the shells tore it apart before it could adapt. "These things are tough," Park said as they moved deeper into the station. "But they're not bulletproof. Keep moving and watch your corners." The human squads moved through the station like they had trained for this their entire lives, which in a way they had. Humans had been fighting in confined spaces for millennia. They knew how to use corridors as kill zones, how to set up overlapping fields of fire, how to turn every corner into a potential ambush. The swarm creatures had never encountered anything like it. They were used to enemies who fought with predictable energy weapons and logical tactics. They didn't know how to handle humans who used explosives as door knockers and treated impossible odds as just another day at the office. Meanwhile, in space, the larger battle was turning into a rout. The Void Swarm's main fleet, which had destroyed dozens of Zilani battle groups, was being systematically dismantled by human weapons that shouldn't have worked. Colonel James Wright was commanding a squadron of destroyers when he got the call he had been waiting for. "Colonel Wright, this is Marine Command. We have enemy contacts landing on the civilian areas of Kepler Station. Can you provide support?" "Negative," Wright replied immediately. "Too much risk of hitting friendlies. We'll handle this the old-fashioned way." He switched to his ship's general communications. "All hands, this is the Colonel. We're going to ram that big ugly bastard heading for the civilian sector. Brace for impact." The destroyer Defiant accelerated directly toward a swarm creature the size of a city block. The alien tried to absorb the ship's energy signatures, but there was no energy to absorb from a ship that was simply flying very fast in a straight line. The impact was devastating. The swarm creature was crushed against the station's hull, while the Defiant's crew, protected by crash restraints and human engineering, survived with minor injuries. "This is Colonel Wright to all ships," he announced calmly. "Sometimes the best weapon is the ship itself. Use your judgment, but remember, we came here to protect these people, whatever the cost." Dr. Elena Vasquez, watching the battle from the safety of the command center, was furiously taking notes. The swarm creatures were adapting, trying to learn from their defeats, but they were adapting to fight the wrong enemy. "They're still trying to counter energy weapons," she told Admiral Chen over the communications link. "They don't understand that we're using completely different principles." "How long before they figure it out?" Chen asked. Elena watched as another group of swarm creatures was destroyed by a barrage of kinetic missiles. "They're a hive mind, Admiral. They think logically. They can't understand why we fight the way we do, because chaos doesn't make sense to them." On the station, Sergeant Park's squad was moving toward the refugee center when they encountered something new, a swarm creature that had learned to avoid human weapons. It was hiding in the power conduits, only emerging to feed on energy systems. "Clever girl," Park muttered, remembering an old movie. "Martinez, you still got those incendiary grenades?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good, these things need energy to survive, right? Let's see how they like fire." The incendiary grenades filled the corridor with flames hot enough to melt steel. The hiding swarm creature tried to absorb the thermal energy, but fire wasn't a directed energy beam. It was a chaotic chemical reaction that burned everything it touched. The creature died screaming, a sound that echoed through the station's corridors like breaking glass. "That's how we do it, people," Park announced to her squad. "These things evolved to fight energy weapons. They never evolved to fight crazy humans with explosives and bad attitudes." The battle for Kepler Station lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Void Swarm force that had seemed unstoppable was completely destroyed. Not a single human ship was lost, though several had damage that would take weeks to repair. More importantly, every civilian on the station was safe. Council Prime Veltar stood in the station's observation deck, looking out at the debris field that had once been a swarm fleet. Human ships moved through the wreckage, searching for survivors and making sure no swarm creatures had escaped. "I don't understand," he said to Admiral Chen, who had come aboard to coordinate the cleanup. "Your weapons are so simple. How did you defeat them so easily?" Chen looked out at her ships, many of them scarred by battle, but all of them still fighting. "Because we've been fighting longer than any other species in the galaxy, Council Prime. We've had practice. But you said you were a peaceful people." "We are," Chen replied. "That's why we fight so hard to protect peace." The swarm made one mistake. They thought that because we don't start fights, we don't know how to finish them. The first major battle was over, but both sides knew it was just the beginning. The swarm's main hive mind was still out there somewhere, learning from this defeat, and the humans were just getting started. Across the human fleet, soldiers cleaned their weapons and checked their equipment. They had proven that the Void Swarm could be beaten. Now they had to prove it could be destroyed. The war was far from over. Deep in the heart of the galaxy, in a system where 3 stars died millions of years ago, the Void Swarm Queen felt something she had never experienced before: uncertainty. The Queen was ancient beyond measure, a hive mind that had consumed 1,000 civilizations. She had faced the energy-wielding Corvani Empire and absorbed their plasma fleets. She had devoured the crystal beings of the Nexus Collective, turning their light-based weapons into food. Every species she encountered followed the same pattern. They built bigger energy weapons, stronger shields, more complex defenses. And she consumed them all. But these humans were different. They fought with primitive projectile weapons that couldn't be absorbed. They used explosives that created chaos instead of ordered energy. Worst of all, they fought with a coordination that seemed impossible. The Queen had studied the battle recordings from Kepler Station. These humans moved like a pack, each individual acting independently while somehow working toward the same goal. It was like watching a school of fish or a flock of birds, except these creatures were apex predators armed with weapons that shouldn't have been effective. She needed to understand them better. Meanwhile, on the planet Zelani Prime, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was learning just how dangerous the swarm could be when it adapted. Santos had been leading evacuation operations for 3 days, moving civilian populations away from major cities before the swarm's ground forces arrived. It should have been routine work, the kind of mission humans had been doing for centuries, but the swarm had been watching, learning. Sergeant Santos called Private Chen over the radio. "We've got movement in the eastern sector. Looks like a small group of digesters." Santos checked her tactical display. The digesters were moving in a pattern she hadn't seen before. Instead of the usual swarm tactics, they were spreading out, trying to surround her position. "They're getting smarter," she told her squad. "Johnson, Martinez, take the left flank. Jen Williams, you're with me. We're going to show these things that smart doesn't mean safe." The battle that followed became legendary among human forces. Santos's squad used every trick in the book, setting up crossfires, using grenades to channel enemy movement, even collapsing a building to create a bottleneck. But the swarm creatures kept adapting, trying new tactics. When the digesters tried to flank them, Santos's team fell back to a prepared position. When the creatures tried to overwhelm them with numbers, the humans used their superior firepower to thin the ranks. It was like a deadly game of chess, except the humans had been playing this game for thousands of years. The breakthrough moment came when one of the digesters managed to corner Private Williams in a dead-end alley. The creature had learned to avoid human weapons by staying behind cover and only emerging to attack. Williams did something the digester couldn't understand. He smiled. "Hey, ugly," Williams shouted. "Catch!" He threw his backpack at the creature. The digester, thinking it was some kind of energy weapon, tried to absorb it. Instead, it got 20 pounds of high explosives with a 5-second timer. The explosion took out not just the digester, but half the alley wall. Williams walked out of the smoke, dusting off his uniform. "Sergeant," he called over the radio, "I think I figured out their weakness. They're too smart for their own good." Captain Rodriguez, monitoring the battle from orbit, had to laugh. "Explain that, Williams." "They keep trying to think like us, sir. But thinking like a human when you're not human just makes you predictable. They're adapting to fight what they think we are, not what we actually are." Rodriguez shared this insight with Admiral Chen, who immediately saw the implications. All units, this is Admiral Chen. The enemy is learning our basic tactics, but they don't understand human psychology. Use that against them. The real test came when the Swarm Queen decided to face the humans directly. She had been hiding in the outer system, studying human behavior through the smaller skirmishes. Now she brought her personal fleet, 100 of her largest and most intelligent creatures, to crush the human force once and for all. The Queen's flagship was a creature the size of a small moon, a living ship that had absorbed the energy of entire star systems. She brought it into the inner system with the confidence of a predator that had never met its match. We met Colonel James Wright instead. Wright was commanding the destroyer squadron that first detected the Queen's approach. His ships were outnumbered 10 to 1 by creatures that could absorb any energy weapon they fired. By all logical measures, his force should have retreated immediately. Instead, Wright did something that made no sense to the Swarm Queen. He ordered his ships to charge directly at her fleet. "All ships, this is Wright," he announced calmly. "We're going to show these things why humans conquered their home planet. Attack pattern Delta 7. For those who don't know, that means we're going to hit them so hard they'll feel it in their next incarnation." The human destroyers accelerated toward the swarm fleet, not firing their weapons, just flying at maximum speed. The Queen's creatures tried to position themselves to absorb the expected energy attacks. Wright waited until his ships were in point-blank range. Then he activated the secret weapon that Dr. Vasquez had developed. Every human ship released clouds of metallic chaff, simple aluminum fragments that reflected and scattered energy. But these weren't ordinary chaff. They were designed to overload the swarm creatures' energy absorption abilities. When the swarm tried to absorb the chaff, they got more energy than they could handle. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. The creatures began to convulse and shut down, overwhelmed by their own feeding instincts. "Now," Wright ordered. The human ships opened fire with everything they had: railguns, missiles, nuclear torpedoes, and even some experimental weapons that the engineers had been saving for a special occasion. The overloaded swarm creatures couldn't defend themselves, but the real shock came when Staff Sergeant Santos, who had been fighting on the planet below, managed to get a message through to the fleet. "Admiral Chen," Santos called over the radio, "I'm trapped in the evacuation center with about 10,000 civilians. The Queen's forces are closing in and I'm running low on ammunition." "Sergeant, we're in the middle of a space battle," Chen replied. "Can you hold out for another hour?" There was a pause. Then Santos's voice came back, calm and steady. "Admiral, with respect, I didn't travel 40,000 light years to let these people down. My squad will hold this position until every civilian is safe. That's not a request for orders, ma'am. That's a promise." Admiral Chen felt something twist in her chest. This was why humans were different. They didn't fight just to win. They fought to protect all ships, she announced to the fleet. "Priority Alpha. Whatever it takes, we protect Sergeant Santos and those civilians." The space battle became secondary. Every human ship that could provide fire support began hammering the swarm forces on the planet. They couldn't risk hitting the evacuation center, so they used precision strikes and danger-close fire missions that would have been impossible for any other species. On the planet, Santos and her squad held their position for 6 hours against impossible odds. They used every trick they could think of, turning the evacuation center into a fortress using civilian vehicles as cover, even jury-rigging booby traps from medical supplies. When Private Johnson asked how they were going to survive, Santos gave him an answer that became part of human military legend. "Johnson, we're not just fighting for these people. We're fighting for the idea that someone will always come when you call for help. If we fail here, that idea dies, so we don't fail." The rescue came when Captain Rodriguez led a marine assault landing directly into the combat zone. His ships took heavy fire from swarm ground forces, but they kept coming, because that's what humans do. They keep coming. When Rodriguez found Santos, she was down to her last magazine and had taken shrapnel wounds in 3 places. But every single civilian was alive. "Sergeant," Rodriguez said, "that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest." Santos smiled, blood running down her face. "Sir, what's the difference?" In space, the Swarm Queen felt something she had never experienced in millions of years of existence: fear. These humans didn't just fight to win. They fought for ideas. They fought for strangers. They fought with a dedication that made no logical sense, and that made them more dangerous than any energy weapon ever created. The Queen began to retreat, pulling her forces back to regroup. But Admiral Chen wasn't done with her yet. All ships pursue the enemy fleet. We're going to end this war before it spreads to anyone else. The hunt for the Swarm Queen had begun. The final hunt took the human fleet to a system that didn't appear on any star chart. 3 dead worlds orbited a dying red star, and in the shadow of the largest planet, the Void Swarm Queen had built her ultimate stronghold. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, looking at the sensor readings with a mixture of awe and disgust. The Queen had turned an entire planet into a breeding ground. Millions of swarm creatures covered its surface like a living carpet, while massive bioships hung in orbit like malevolent moons. "Jesus," whispered Commander Davis beside her. "How many are there?" "Too many to count," Chen replied. "But that doesn't matter. We didn't come this far to turn back now." Dr. Elena Vasquez was studying the readings from her science station. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. The Queen isn't just hiding there, she's preparing for something big." "What kind of something?" "I think she's planning to split herself, create multiple Queen organisms and spread them across the galaxy. If she succeeds, even killing her won't stop the swarm." Admiral Chen felt a cold weight in her stomach. Everything they had fought for would be meaningless if the Queen escaped to spread her plague across the stars. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Maybe 6 hours," Elena replied. "After that, the process will be irreversible." Chen opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. In 6 hours, our enemy will become impossible to defeat. We have one chance to end this war permanently. Today, we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten innocent people." The plan was simple in the way that only desperate plans could be simple. The human fleet would assault the planet directly, fighting through millions of swarm creatures to reach the Queen herself. There would be no retreat, no second chances, no clever tactics. Just humans with weapons fighting their way through hell to protect people they had never met. Captain Rodriguez led the ground assault, taking every Marine, soldier, and volunteer who could hold a weapon. They came down in dropships through a storm of swarm defenders, landing on a planet that looked like a nightmare come to life. The surface was covered in biomechanical structures that pulsed with stolen energy. Swarm creatures swarmed over everything like insects, while larger creatures the size of buildings moved slowly through the mechanical forest. "Welcome to hell, Marines," Rodriguez announced as his dropship touched down. "Our job is simple. Kill everything that moves and keep moving toward the Queen. Questions?" "Sir," called Sergeant Park, "what if we run out of ammunition?" Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Then we improvise. These things have been feeding on advanced civilizations for millions of years. But they've never faced humans who are too stupid to know when they're beaten." The ground battle was unlike anything in military history. Human squads moved through the alien landscape like wolves, using explosives to clear paths and kinetic weapons to destroy everything in their way. The swarm creatures tried to overwhelm them with numbers. But humans had been fighting outnumbered for their entire evolutionary history. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, still recovering from her wounds but refusing to stay behind, led her squad through a grove of energy-conducting trees. The swarm had learned to use the environment as a weapon, channeling absorbed energy through the alien vegetation. "These things think they're so smart," Santos muttered as she planted charges on the base of the largest tree. "Let's see how smart they are when their cover is gone." The explosion brought down half the grove, crushing dozens of swarm creatures and clearing a path for the advancing Marines. But more creatures kept coming, emerging from the ground like deadly flowers. In space, the battle was equally desperate. Admiral Chen had divided her fleet into 3 groups, each attacking from a different direction to keep the swarm defenders spread thin. But there were just so many enemies. Colonel Wright, commanding the destroyer wing, found himself facing a bioship the size of a city. The creature's surface was covered in energy absorption organs that glowed like malevolent eyes. "All ships," Wright announced calmly. "This is going to hurt. Ram formation. We're going through that thing, not around it." The human destroyers accelerated toward the bioship in a tight wedge formation. The swarm creature tried to absorb their energy signatures, but the ships weren't using energy weapons. They were using themselves as kinetic projectiles. The collision was devastating. Wright's destroyer punched through the creature's hull like a bullet through tissue paper, followed by the rest of his squadron. The bioship died in convulsions, but Wright's ship was badly damaged. "This is Wright to all units," he called over the radio, his voice strained. "The big ones aren't as tough as they look. Sometimes you just have to hit them in the face. On the planet's surface, Captain Rodriguez's forces were fighting their way toward the Queen's central hive. The closer they got, the more desperate the swarm's defense became. Creatures that had never been seen before emerged from the alien structures, living weapons designed specifically to kill humans. But the Queen had made a fundamental mistake. She was still thinking like a hive mind, trying to create perfect solutions to specific problems. Humans didn't work that way. When faced with a new threat, they adapted instantly, using whatever was available. When swarm creatures began emerging from underground tunnels, Sergeant Park simply sealed the tunnels with demolition charges. When flying creatures attacked from above, Private Williams shot them down with a grenade launcher he had modified to fire proximity-fused rounds. The thing about humans, Rodriguez explained to a wounded Zilani observer who had insisted on recording the battle, is that we're not logical. We don't fight the way military textbooks say we should. We fight the way that works. The breakthrough came when Dr. Vasquez, analyzing the Queen's biosignatures from orbit, realized something crucial. "Admiral," she called over the communication system, "I know how to kill her. The Queen isn't just a creature. She's a living energy storage system. All the power she's absorbed over millions of years is still inside her." "What does that mean?" Chen asked. "It means she's basically a giant battery, and we know what happens when you overload a battery." Admiral Chen understood immediately. All ships concentrate fire on the Queen's position. Not kinetic weapons, everything that generates energy. Lasers, particle beams, plasma cannons. We're going to feed her so much energy that she explodes. The plan went against everything the humans had learned about fighting the swarm. But sometimes the best weapon is the enemy's strength turned against them on the planet. Rodriguez received the orders and passed them to his troops. "All units pull back to minimum safe distance. The Navy is about to do something incredibly stupid." "Sir," asked Sergeant Santos, "are we sure this will work?" Rodriguez looked up at the sky, where hundreds of human ships were maneuvering into position above the Queen's hive. "Sergeant, I've learned not to bet against human stupidity. We've been proving experts wrong for 40,000 years." The energy bombardment began slowly. Human ships that had been using only kinetic weapons suddenly opened fire with every energy system they had. Lasers, plasma beams, particle cannons, and experimental weapons that the engineers had been afraid to test. The Queen, following billions of years of instinct, tried to absorb it all. At first she grew stronger. Her biomechanical form expanded, crackling with stolen power. She began the process of splitting herself, preparing to create multiple queens to spread across the galaxy. But humans are very good at excess. They had brought more firepower than any rational species would ever need, and they kept firing. The Queen began to convulse as more and more energy poured into her systems. Her absorption organs, evolved to handle the energy output of advanced civilizations, couldn't cope with the raw, chaotic power of human weapons designed by engineers who believed that if some was good, more was better. "She's overloading," Dr. Vasquez reported from her sensors. "Her bioelectrical systems are beginning to fail. All ships," Admiral Chen announced, "increase power. Give her everything we have." The Queen tried to fight back, releasing massive energy discharges that lit up the dead system like a new star. But she was fighting her own nature now. Every instinct told her to absorb energy, even as that energy was destroying her from within. The end came suddenly. The Queen's massive form began to glow from the inside, brighter and brighter until she was visible from space. Then, with a flash that briefly outshone the system's dying star, she exploded. The blast wave swept across the planet, vaporizing every swarm creature and sterilizing the biomechanical structures. In an instant, millions of years of evolutionary perfection were reduced to atoms. Across the galaxy, every remaining swarm creature simply died. Without their queen, they were just empty shells, falling silent one by one until the ancient threat was finally extinct. Admiral Chen stood on her bridge, watching the radiation patterns fade on her sensors. "All ships report status." The reports came in one by one. Damaged ships, wounded crews, depleted ammunition, but they had all survived. Every human who had answered the Zilani distress call was going home. "Admiral," called Dr. Vasquez, "I'm getting a transmission from the Zilani Confederation. Council Prime Veltar wants to speak with you."